started. Perfect. Go back to our screen share. Just wanted to share a little bit about us, and then we'll move on to our presenters today. So Oregon Agricultural Trust, we partner with farmers and ranchers to protect agricultural lands for the benefit of Oregon's economy, communities, and landscapes. We definitely work with farmers and ranchers to protect farmland into perpetuity by way of easements. But today we're going to be talking about succession planning as well to make sure that that farm ground succeeds in the next generation too, which is important as well. We have four different pieces kind of to our work here. Ag land protection that we will actually speak more about tomorrow. So working land easements as a tool on ground. Sorry, we're admitting people still. Technical assistance, that's with our farmers and ranchers, as well as with other service providers. So accountants, attorneys, to make sure everybody's well equipped to help farmers and ranchers with their succession needs and with working lands easements as well. Today, education, we talk a lot about what farmers and ranchers, as well as attorneys, appraisers, and the general public need to know about working lands easements, succession, any assistance that we need to make sure that that working grounds or the farmland still succeeds in the next generation. And then advocacy work. We work alongside state and national partners for funding to protect agricultural land. 25% of Oregon land and farms and is in farms and ranches, but 64% of those lands are going to change hands in the next 20 years, which is an opportunity, but also something to focus on as we look at the age of farmers and ranchers being 60 years old. So this ebbs and flows, but we've definitely seen that number rise over in the last few years, and making sure that those farmers and ranchers are able to safely get the ground or the property and the operation in the next generation's hands. And the most concerning piece of this is 81% of farmers and ranchers have no succession plan. So that's hopefully what we're going to work on today as we have this conversation, and help escort some of that conversation within the family to work towards a completion of a succession plan. A lot of folks maybe get started and they definitely run into some concerns or some pieces of the puzzle or the process that holds them up in that creation of the plan. Some of the succession planning challenges we see, definitely having successors. So some operations do have the opportunity to have someone built into that operation that is poised and ready to take over as the next generation, but others do not. So we'll talk a little bit about that as well. Getting started. So there's just getting to the point of being able to say we need to have something put in place or some plan, and understanding, which we hopefully will break down quite a bit of it today, or give you some tools to help you look at the different pieces of putting a succession plan together, and being able to take those bits and pieces instead of just taking on the whole conglomerate as one fell swoop, and it being concerning for you and not then being able to get started in that process. There's definitely emotions and costs involved with creating a succession plan. It is some tough conversations that could take place with the family and can be costly, but it could also essentially be costly too if we don't work towards having that plan. If we don't have a plan put in place on these operations, parcels could be sold to pay fees or taxes if something isn't put in place to get that succeeded, or it could be converted to non-farm uses, which could be concerning too. And it's definitely harder for beginning farmers to get onto ground. Access to farmland is a struggle as it stands, and if we aren't able to help that process, then it becomes even more difficult. Competition for these farmers and ranchers, being able to access land, definitely from the investment buyers, increasing land prices. And it's frankly very difficult to cash flow mortgage with farming alone. And so we're definitely seeing some diversity from cash inflows to help support that. So with that, we will turn the stage over to Diana, who will start us off today, Diana Turney, and she will introduce herself. And then Christy Anderson Brecken will come in about an hour or so and take us to the next step. And just would you mind, both of you, introducing yourselves right now, and then we'll hand it over to Christy once Diana's done. Diana, could you go first? Oh, you're on mute, Diana.
All right, there we go, technology. Hi, my name is Diana Turney, and I'm with Clackamas Community College. I am pleased to be here today, and I work in farm and ranch succession planning, actually in several states. And so I am a farmer and rancher myself. And so I look forward to sharing what I've learned over the years, both as an accountant, working with hundreds and hundreds of farmers of all types and ranchers, and give you some ideas on how to get started. Thank you.
Thanks, Diana. Christy?
Yeah, I'm Christy Anderson Brecken. I'm at Oregon State University in the Department of Applied Economics. I teach agricultural law here and other classes, but agricultural law is the one that aligns with what we're doing today. So I see, those students, many of whom actually in our department study agricultural business management, and a lot of them go back to their family farm. So I teach them about these processes too, and I'm happy to also, share with other family members and you all here today. And I think that is a nice connection we can have. I am originally from North Dakota. My in-laws should be working on this process as well. They are agricultural landowners, although they rent out their cropland and pasture land to others who operate it. So it's a topic near and dear to my heart. And I've been working with OAT, since its inception. So I'm happy to be here.
Thank you, Christy. We're happy to have both of you. Diana, do you want to take us away?
Sure. I'd like to start by saying I really enjoyed working with Nellie and Andrea and Mark and others at OAT. I want you to know this is a really awesome partnership that you have available to you. You have very passionate, active farmers and ranchers who have developed this agricultural land trust, and it's extraordinary. And so I've worked with people in many places, but here are people that they live what they preach. And it's what kind of brings me here today. So growing up on a farm in Colorado, I learned some things. The first thing I learned is you work really, really hard. And so I started working at about age 3 on our family farm. My job was to feed about 400 chickens. And we had 30 some head of very large draft horses. And then we had cows and calves and sheep and all sorts of things. And we raised the feed for them. I didn't know what a CSA was, but when I turned 6, I was allowed to get on my horse, and we took a 6.4 mile radius around to all my neighbors and delivered all manner of things that we could fit in the saddlebags. And so I learned about a CSA early on in my life, and agriculture, how you make ends meet. The whole idea behind a farm and ranch, to me, is continuation. Because when it goes away and the land is no longer used for agricultural purposes, we've lost something. The USDA did a study, and they found that for every dollar in agriculture, what does it do in the economy? It turns around 20 times. If you have in the service-based business or retail, it's maybe between 3 to 5 times that dollar turns over. So agriculture is a very big foundation in Oregon and our country, and we need it. You also don't get land back. And so it's what brought me to the point I'm at today. About 7 years ago, I moved here. My daughter was in a car accident, and so she needed help. Well, here's what I learned in that process. Things change very quickly sometimes in your life, and we had to move from our ranch and come and care for our daughter. So that's the big life change. The second thing is that it can be very expensive, and you might change your choices. But the other thing I learned is you need contingencies because life happens. So we're going to go through that kind of from the lens that I've seen, and also with working with, well, hundreds and hundreds of farmers over about 30 years in my career in agriculture. Prior to that, I was a corporate accountant, and I worked in really big companies all over. So I'm big on options. I don't like to find out after the fact what maybe I could have or should have done. So I think knowing the options is most important to you. And you develop a competency. Well, you're an extraordinary group of people here at Country Natural Beef because you've already formed a co-op. That can be a very strong organizational structure to assist not only in redistributing the profits right back to you pro rata. Your 501c12, for those of you that know the details, is really a strong organization. It can be taken further. If you look in Tillamook, they realized that they were having a hard time keeping people raising the cows and milking them. And so that wonderful cheese and ice cream and all the dairy products that they have are preserved not only through the same organization you have, but they also are willing to buy the farms and ranches if people do not have a succession plan. And they took a step further, and now they have milkers who come out so people can take vacations or have emergencies in their lives and their operation continues. So I think there are a lot of things that you can do, and I applaud you as an organization for all that you've done so far. Another thing you have to do is the goal, managing your expectations versus your wants. And I have an exercise I'll share at the end of this. It's called a Dare to Dream. And to me, I've always been able to achieve my goals if I knew what I was working toward. I think you all have goals, and they are certainly unique and individual to you. But sometimes it's really good to put them down in great detail. And that means being really clear on values. And I'll go into that here a little bit more in a minute. So and I kind of went through that slide, but here's some statistics that if it doesn't get you going with some of the things that Andrea has shared, here's what was published in the 2021 Oregon Agricultural Statistical Bulletin from the USDA. They pulled it from there.
Diana,
Yes.
did you want to share your slides?
I
Or did you
did.
want me? Or did you want me to?
I'd be glad to. I clicked it, but oh, you need to disable. Let me do it.
Oh.
It's not letting.
Perfect.
I thought I clicked on that, and I am so very sorry.
That's okay.
Okay,
There you go. Try that again. And I'll take this moment. If anybody has questions during the presentations, please feel free to just shout them out, raise your hand, or type them in the chat.
Okay, so is it showing okay now?
It is. Great. Thank you, Diana.
Okay, all right, thanks. All right, so some statistics, because as an accountant, I understand things through numbers. And so I looked at this and I just went, wow. Now, when you look at the buckets individually, not so scary, but when you aggregate, so typically people are starting to get toward retirement age at 55 or so, they're starting to think about it a bit more, but then on down into the 70s, you add these three categories up, that's 64. But to me, the real number is look what's coming down the pipe. And there are a lot more people in the 50 to 54 age group than the younger part. So if you add another 10 or as much as the whole 17%, now the picture comes into view. That means that that's one barrier. People are getting older. And you may have noticed, I've noticed that of my corporate people that I've worked with over the years, they drop like flies after they get into 65 to 70. And my farmer friends and my clients, my word, they're living into their 80s, 90s, and beyond. The last class that I had on farm transitions at my college, people were on average at 77. I think I'm actually going to get closer to 80 this term. That is how old that on average the students in my class are. So they're reaching the point they have to do something because they know they can't continue. So you'll have someone help you understand more specifics, but ownership type can be a really big problem in a transition. And of these Schedule F filing folks, 84.2% of them are individuals. They're sole proprietorships, not LLCs. They are sole proprietorships. The IRS says you can't sell yourself. And so working on a structure is going to be one of the things that is recommended and an option to consider to make it easier, as well as for protection. And I'll give you an example on that. Other things you may have thought of, or personally, I think you think about it a lot. What about family dynamics? You know, maybe you have more than one heir that you're considering. Maybe there have been inequities that you perceive and you want to make it all even. There can be a whole series of issues, but whatever it is, managing family dynamics, I will tell you, of everyone I've worked with, is number one on why farm and ranch transitions don't happen. So that to me is something we'll talk more about. Creating a clear set of goals and really thinking about them. I'll give you an example on this one. I had a gentleman who I said, what is your goal? You want to sell your farm? It's been in your family for 2 generations and you just want to sell it. What do you want to do? And he said, I'll draw you a picture. And he drew a boat. And I said, really? You want to go on a sailboat? Yep, I want to sail around the world. Every time he came into my office, he had yachting magazines and he was ready to go. His wife went along for the ride. It lasted 2 whole years. They had never been yachting. They went to a 3-month class to learn how to deal with this great big boat they bought. And in 2 years, they wanted me to help them buy their farm back. So you might want to think about the next chapter as part of this transition. And that helps you set the goals that you're going to do. It's really cool to go visit those grandkids and go see the things you've always wanted to see for a time. But have you really checked it out? Think about that a little. A timeline, just like your farm and your ranch has very specific deadlines. You calve at a particular time. You breed your animals at a particular time. You raise your crops. You go to market at a particular time. It's no different in a transition plan. But most of all, you got to get started, because if you don't, you never get there. So exactly what is important to you? The first thing I urge you to think about not only is your family, you probably want them to get along. And that is another really good reason to get going on this, because if you leave it to the courts or a very basic will, you're probably going to be very disappointed in the end result. Another thing is your neighbors. I find that many folks that have had neighbors near them over the years, they would have done something differently if they had visited with them. In one of my classes, I had the second largest blueberry grower in the state of Oregon mention that they were working toward retirement. And a little later in the class, another person popped up and said, well, we're going to sell our blueberry operation. And the second biggest blueberry farmer, just their head whips around and they're like, what? I mean, this is their neighbor adjacent across the street is getting ready to sell their ranch and never talk to their neighbor across the way. They thought they're big enough. You don't want any more. Well, turns out they ended up working a deal and they didn't have to pay the real estate costs and they could work through it and save quite a load of money and put more money in the transitioning farmers' pockets. So again, talk to your neighbors, your community, whether it is your neighbors or a broader community, perhaps your faith, the local towns or organizations you belong to. You need to consider what will happen as you transition. Those people that loved you and you used to go out with periodically because they knew you. You sell your ranch and you make their lives miserable because now the people that bought it, it's not uncommon for them to have nothing to do with you again. And if that's really an important relationship to you, you might think a little harder about the direction you take. I see that one actually pretty often. I also believe that farms and ranches to have made it, and I did read some of the history on your highlighted ranches, and they are stunning. I am very impressed by many of you that are showcased out there. And my hat's off to you, literally. You have values and you have a legacy. And if you think about that next chapter, and you should, it is not a cliff. I had a person in one of my classes, he was trembling and he would not come across the doorway into my class. And I finally went out and I talked to him and I said, sir, can I help you? I think you're here for Farm and Ranch. And he said, I am, but I'm afraid to come into the room. I just know I'm going to die after I get my transition plan done. We talked and finally he came into the room, and after a while, he shared it about the 5th or 6th class, how glad he was he got started on it. And he didn't have the apprehension and the fears and stress that came with it. And so it's okay to get started. It's okay to admit, I'm not sure. There are people to help you. For many folks, there are financial considerations and there's perhaps retirement in varying stages. Maybe you plan on taking a step back. Maybe you want to stay there. My dad, he wanted to be able to look out the window and see the farm animals and the beautiful rangeland. And he, in his final years, was a quadriplegic with MS. And so our family value was to retrofit my dad's bedroom and the sunroom we built on, so my dad could age in place. Most hospitals did not have the grade of, bedroom that we set up for my dad, but those were our values. And we invested in those so we could keep my dad home as long as possible. What are your values and what do you want? Business structure, we talked about a minute ago. Depending on the type of transition plan that you choose, probably at the very least, you're going to consider an LLC because it's easy for people to get on and off to go to more advanced forms of business, but protection is the key. And I find it is one thing that we all don't like to talk about, but I have a rancher that I'm working with here in Washington that one family member had the thought that they would save money and not get the truck brakes replaced. And they were hauling a very large combine on a trailer behind their big rig. It got away from them and they killed 8 people. I'm not saying that they should not pay for that. They had pretty healthy insurance, but basically they're losing everything and that goes away. So inadvertent accidents, that was a case where people made a bad decision. I have cases where people just they didn't do anything wrong and people still managed to come up with a lawsuit. I'm especially firm on this topic, and I'll look you right in the eye and I'll say it. I have worked with hundreds of attorneys. I've been the controller and CFO of some pretty large law firms. And something I noticed right off the bat that we did initially, right after we did the client matter check to make sure there was no conflict of interest, was net worth evaluation. We figure out how much you're worth and how big a lawsuit to build around things. Our firm was no different than others, and I hope you'll kick that to heart. Wills and estates. We want you to know that estate planning can take different steps. You need to understand what you really want. Do you have a family member that has a special need? You might carve out a protection. I wouldn't have thought 7 years ago that my daughter would have been in a car accident. And so for us, we're making other choices so we can help take care of her. And we have been very candid about that with our boys and are providing for that so that she can be taken care of as she has additional needs. Planning for that future. How do you know how many grandchildren you're going to have? Do you know when that family member is going to become a drug addict or they're going to marry someone that is nothing less than a gold digger? Planning for future needs can make a huge difference. And taxes. Andrew referenced taxes. I feel that we all have paid a lot in taxes over the years, and I would like to not pay any extra than I have to. The thing that really turned my head when I came here is when I did an analysis between LoopNet and LandWatch. I did an extract and pulled out the duplicates, and I went with farms and ranches of a size that you can make a living wage on. At that time, there were about 1,875 farms and ranches in Oregon for sale. The days to sell were approximately 232 days. Fast forward to this last year. And now, as of just December, there were over 10,000 properties listed between the two. When I take it back down again to those that it's a family operation and living wage type situation, I get in the 5,000 range, closer to 5,200. But the staggering thing is, it's getting to be almost 900 average days to sell. And these are listed properties. There are others that never make the listing. They're transitioned in a different way. So waiting to sell may not be the answer either. So your transition plan has a critical path. Like my husband's an engineer, and he thinks in terms of a critical path and a Gantt chart and what has to occur along the way. I think a transition plan is a lot like that. You have to decide who your key partners are for you. And when we talk about key partners, do you have an ag accountant, not just an accountant? Do you have an ag attorney, not just a great business attorney? You'll find out the difference as you work with them. Managing your assets, and what are they, and clearly identifying them. They can be more than what shows on your balance sheet. You could have natural resources that are extremely valuable and you never really thought about it. You will have operational plans, and you're also going to have financial. But the control and the leadership, that's a sticky point. Sometimes not all children, heirs, whoever you're bringing into the fold get along with each other or with key employees. So I brought into the point family dynamics. Let's talk about that a bit more. They are powerful. Are you sitting at that kitchen table where you all have grown up around the table and there have been exchanges? Do you know that sometimes there are very hurt feelings about the things that have been said or done over the years? And that solely is going to cause a problem in the transition. You might want to start a transition discussion either off farm, or you might want to do it in a place that is not, it is neutral, so that everybody feels like they're being heard. I don't believe family dynamics are understood. And I say that because we have conceptions of our own. We think things, we perceive things to be. Perhaps you perceive there's just no one to take over. And I find that to be a very mistaken idea. There are many people who want to be in agriculture. And I know that Christy Anderson-Brecken can confirm at OSU. There are numerous colleges and universities across the state of Oregon that have very healthy ag programs, and people who really want to be in your shoes and they're willing to put in the work. So if you need a key employee, a farm manager, and there are many folks, Rogue Farm Corps, and many different folks teaching folks how to farm in traditional and non-traditional ways. So there's hope. The family dynamics change as well. I saw this when there are changes. Maybe the farm family, maybe mom and dad get a divorce. I had that happen a couple of times now in my class. The dynamic changed completely. Your children might lose a spouse. One might die. They might leave. There are many potentials. So realizing and providing for these in your will. I want this to happen. I never want this to happen. And they are manageable. I had someone that has done such an awesome job. They realized that they had someone that was married to a spouse that probably was just waiting in the wings, that as soon as the land was available and they passed away, that very likely this individual was going to leave their spouse, in other words, the farm owner's child. And they probably would see the farm forced to be sold as part of that situation. They provided in the will that it could only stay within the family line, and they did other provisions that protected it. So it could only go to the kids, and then it would be managed by an heir within the family, not by the spouse who might try and take over. So again, provisions can be put in place to protect what your wishes are.
Hey, Diana, real quick. There's some beeping that is coming through. Is that something that you can maybe silenced, you know?
I can try and lower my sound to see if it's less. I have the feeling it has, let me try this. There, we'll try that. Okay, is that any
Oh, it's,
better?
no, it's still just beeped again.
Okay, I don't know how to make it stop. I got the bright idea to get a keyboard that is solar powered. And it somehow doesn't think it has enough light, although I don't know how you could have a brighter room. So it's going to go after this afternoon. I'm making a trip to go buy a new one. And I apologize to everyone for this beepy sound. Anyway, again, I thank you for asking, but I don't know how to change it because I can't stop it. There's no battery to change. So you have to acknowledge and explore. And when I say acknowledge, how many of you have gone out and looked at your farm and your ranch through new eyes? How does somebody else see it? How would a realtor see it? If it's been in the family for generations and generations, you see the same thing every day. I had a really sweet 94-year-old lady that I knew since I was a toddler. And I was helping her with her farm transition. And she would go on and on when I came to her. I was an orchard about her beautiful roses. And what she saw was the beautiful roses lining her half-mile drive, and the gorgeous fields and the gorgeous trees for all their fruit, and the pump house and the pasture and the pond where they used to go swim in the summer. Unfortunately, the reality was what I saw was a bunch of wild, overgrown trees everywhere, not bearing fruit, lots of dead wood, overgrown with Russian olives throughout the field. The pump house sounded like it was going into orbit when she turned it on, and it sputtered very dark smoke and everything everywhere. Her house had settled, and there was about a 2-inch settling in the house. And just across the property, it was in a great state of disrepair. In her eyes, it was that gorgeous home that she moved into in the 1970s. It wasn't that when we worked on it 5 years ago. The sad thing was she couldn't hear me. I mean, I was obviously someone she had known since very tiny. She went with her own thoughts, priced it with a realtor. 33 people never even got out of their car and turned around and left. 33 appointments before she finally realized that something maybe wasn't okay. She ended up selling it for substantially less because she was unwilling to make the repairs, although I can tell you she had more than enough to do it. You can't be stubborn. You have to be honest about what you see there, and it's time to fix it. If you can identify the risks and the opportunities, you also might have options. That field where you've been picking up all those rocks all these years because they get in the swather and they get in your tires and everything else you're dealing with, they might be very valuable rock. And we all know what happens to river rock when people get it. They put it into stone fireplaces and they pay a pretty penny for that. You might have a very large deposit there. If you also admit to yourself, is there dangers on my property? What are they? And what can I do about them? Because those dangers could end your transition if you don't. I had a farmer that I went to school with, and his transition plan was his boys to buy the property. Ultimately, only one ended up buying it. And he and his new wife bought the property, moved in, and after about a year there, they found out they were expecting a beautiful baby. When that baby got to be 18 months old, she was walking and she got away from the house. And she drowned in a 5-gallon bucket. There were hundreds of them everywhere, all over that place, hundreds and hundreds. Dad just never picked up all the feed buckets and everything. He didn't think it was that important. That ended that family transition. That family was never again, and they ended up breaking up. There are risks in what you do. Farming and ranching is dangerous. You know that when you pay workers' comp. So deal with them, look at them, and address them. In starting your family meetings, don't wait Get started now. Let folks know you're looking at a transition. You're starting to think about it. I don't have all the details, and I'd sure like to hear what you were thinking. And there needs to be someone who takes notes, and it's openly shared. You can then begin a timeline as you look at it. Am I looking at 3 years, 5 years, 10 years? And perhaps you want to think about the follow-on generation. One of the best things you can do to assure a farm transition goes well, especially well into the future, is get an annuity. And if you buy it when someone is really young, like when they're a baby, it'll have a significant cash value by the time they're ready to perhaps take a step in and buy into the property, or maybe it helps you buy them out when the time comes. It's been a very good tool, and we've used it in our family to assist with our transition. So I urge you to think about that. You might take, who are my key players? Certainly my family. I think they're very, very important. Even they're good and bad, right? The staff, if you have employees, there might be tremendous knowledge, and you might feel like you'd really like to take care of that longtime employee that's been so loyal all these years. And there are things you might want to do. And there are some people you don't want to include right now. It's just not a good time. What about your banker? A good ag attorney, a good accountant that's in agriculture, perhaps a realtor. And if things are kind of mixed up in your family, or you're not getting very far, consider a family counselor that can help see things through a new picture and help you work through whatever those problems are. I kept hitting a wall with one family, and nobody ever told me any of the things about it. There was some very serious abuse in that family, and it's far beyond anything I knew how to deal with. And I lined them up with a counselor, and they could start working through it. Otherwise, I don't think that one would have ever gotten there. There were some very painful issues there. Maybe yours is nothing like that, but maybe there are just some hard feelings, and maybe you need some help with someone to help you pass those. Your business has lots of attributes, and I consider that kind of the foundation. And make no mistake about what you have is a business. Unfortunately, many people fail to recognize that a farm or ranch is a business. I know that it's very dear to you because you've lived and worked on it, the memories that you have of your children. I can't help but not go around my place and just smile when I go, because there's a lifetime of memories there. But it's a business. And if you treat it like a business, it can take care of you. Attributes you may not expect. I never realized how valuable agritourism can be. And we were really struggling at one point. And I had someone come and visit us and say, gosh, this is just a breath of fresh air. I'd love to come out here and stay. And I thought, well, come on out. And they said, well, we'll pay you $5,000 to bring my family of 4 out for a week. And this is back in the 80s. And I said, okay, sounds good to me. And after that, they said, you need to charge more. It needs to be 10 or 15,000 for a family. And if you'll do more, I'll give you the names of as many people as you want. That was a very good lesson for me. So you might have attributes you don't expect of value. And that helped me. You could have fully integrated operations. So from farm to table kind of experience. That kind of thing is invaluable. And it can help with your transition because you can allow different family members, key employees to take over aspects of that. And it can be a thing of beauty to make a transition work. As well as you know that timeline. And I bet you're more complex than you think. You've been out doing what you do every day for decades in many cases. Some of you are 5th and 6th generation operations. I have one right now that's an 8th generation. And they assume that everything is known because you grew up on the place. But nothing could be further from the truth. You could be working every day on that farm, but you'd miss some of the key things that are going on as to why people do what they do. So how do you get started? You start now, and it starts with scheduling of that family meeting. I'm making no commitments. We're just starting to explore. We'd like to gather what you think. And maybe you'd like to do it over lunch. Maybe you'd like to just have an enjoyable time. I've had families that they couldn't all get together. I've had Zoom meetings where a family member was in other countries, one in Afghanistan 5 years ago, joined us. And so wherever it is, get that family meeting started. Consider what the issues are. Who wants to come back? Maybe who doesn't? What people are thinking. I just want to be able to come visit. I'm not asking for a share in the property. I just want to come visit. And then you can start exploring the options that you want. What are your financials? How is everything titled? When we get to the brass tacks of it, this is when I find out that, oh, you've just been paying property taxes all these years and you never had it retitled, and it's transitioned 2 times since then. Wow, there's some work to be done. Do you have the opportunity to work with your planning and zoning? Maybe there's additional homes that could be built or turned from that feed storage area that you've turned an old homestead into a living property where someone can come and stay, be it a farm manager or a family member. And that might make the transition happen. I have had a really nice individual. He had a very large nursery operation, and he used to clear over 2 million a year after all expenses. 2 million a year is pretty good. And his wife died about 8 years ago now. And his business just went down and down and down until the point he came in to see me. He was making less than 20,000. His profit was less than 20,000. Didn't even touch his taxes. And he said, what do? I have 2 kids. I have a son and a daughter. And they've been saying they're going to come back, but nobody's come back. And I can't do it anymore. And I just saw his hands. They were just so weathered, and they were just gnarled from all the hard work he had done over the years. I'm worth millions, but I want it to stay a nursery. This was been in my family for 3 generations. And so we had that family meeting and we got started. It took a different turn over time. They both said, oh, we'll come back and we'll help you. One came back to help. The daughter came back to help. The son had lots of promises, but always an excuse why he couldn't. And after about 2 years, I asked him, could we just get down to the honesty factor here? Are you going to come back, and when? And if not, let's just say you're not coming back. A very interesting thing happened when we asked for a commitment. His wife came on and said, just sell it. I just want the money. That's all I want. And that's all he's going to want. It was a very interesting discussion to have. Well, the farmer was pretty frustrated at that point. And he reached out to the daughter and said, are you going to move back? And she was already coming 2 and 3 days a week to stay with him. And she had her own farm elsewhere. And she said, I can't stay full-time, Dad, but I have somebody who will come live with you. And it's, one of our not too distant relatives. And she actually has a degree in agronomy. So it seemed like a match made in heaven, until the farmer said, she has dogs and I will not have dogs in my house. Now, realizing this gentleman could not climb the stairs in his house, he had kind of created a makeshift bedroom downstairs. And so over time, he kind of softened a little bit on his limitations. And today he agreed to having an ADU built on the property. Can't be permanent, but a temporary structure, 1 level. He doesn't risk falling down the stairs. That happened twice. One of the times he came in, he was black and blue head to toe when he came into a meeting with us. And so now he's in a safer place. He's doing better than he's done in a very long time. This distant relative does have the use of the home, and they do have their dogs, but he's okay with that now. And each person has what they want, but the farm is going to stay a farm. And he let his son know, I will give you something, but I'm going to take care of this heritage I have. And your sister's willing to step up. You have the choice. And he gave him 1 more year, and the son never came back other than to visit. And so decisions were made by that individual. I love you, but this isn't about money. It's about something more. Those are hard discussions to have. And yet, if they're true to your values, you should have them. We talked about the integration in markets and the timeline, and pretty much the financial and operational, but we didn't touch on something there. Do you have really a good policy and procedure manual why you do what you do? Operationally, why do you calve at this time? The lineage, many of you have registered livestock. You know, we were very careful in the breeding of our horses and our cows. You, I'm sure, have the same thing. And you have some pretty good sized operations. So it is a very complex thing. I worked with one rancher and they had close to 6,000 pairs. And we used QuickBooks to set it up so we could keep track of their lineage. There are things you can do to help manage it and create a knowledge base. One thing I love is you get those little pocket-sized notepads with a pen. If you started now and recording January 30, I did the following and here's why. That can become the start of a procedures manual, why you do what you do. And you can share some of your anecdotes as to why you did or didn't do things over time. Same thing with financials, really gathering that information so everybody knows where you're at instead of the surprise. We've been over the age thing, but look at the 37,200 farms. I had the assumption that in Oregon, we were losing farms. There were fewer and fewer farms each year, and that is not true. There are more farms in Oregon today than 10 years ago. We thought that EFU would be a great preservation and the forestry exemption. We're going to keep it in forest. Well, it has been used and divided. So in many cases, people can get a 5 or 10 acre parcel, get a few chickens, a couple llamas, something, and it's called agriculture. It's not a living wage. It's not contributing in any significant way other than to the reduction of taxes for people who plop a $5–10 million home on it. I don't think that's what it was intended for, but that is what's happening when you look at the statistics. Protecting your land, that's your choice. And it has a 2-time hop. When you do a transition, it isn't just about you and the current property owners. Look at the next set and have the same expectations of them to start their transition plan, because your follow-on may depend on that. But help the next generation succeed and overcome the challenges you have. Oregon has one of the most restrictive estate taxes in the nation. Massachusetts, the only other one, but they allow deductions. 1 million, anything over $1 million, and it is subject to a minimum of 10% estate tax, and it's due in a very short window. So I know there's one thing that Oregon will do, the agricultural exemption, but you have some very specific caveats, and you would want an ag accountant to work with you to make sure you meet those requirements. The next thing is fair is not equal. If you can take the time and make sure that you own up to this. It was hard for me and tell them the situation with my daughter. But perhaps your ag transition will not happen if you do not provide enough for the ag piece to continue. Rarely do I have where, you know, it's even right down the middle. Typically, people have other things. They've helped one go to college. They've provided and helped another get a home or overcome some obstacle. At the end of the day, rarely have I seen fair is equal. And when you try and divide up at the end, a lot of people carry the baggage of the other things that existed out there. And so consider what your wishes are and not so much fair is equal. Making people really rich, is that really the goal? I hope not. I think that your plans, we've all talked about future living, your options, what you want to do, maintaining those relationships, you've come to depend on them over the years. And when family doesn't talk, when neighbors won't have anything to do with you, changes how you view things. And your continued ties to the land will not change, even if you transition. Some of you may decide to move, but I think you will still have that in your heart. The federal estate tax currently doesn't appear to be a problem for most people at $12.7 million per person. Seems like you're okay. That sunsets in 2025, which is not very long. It goes down to 5 million at that point, and they're already working on the potential of dropping it down to 1 million. And that can go up to as much as 45%. So if you take the 10% for Oregon, many of you have fairly substantial properties. Imagine taking 45%. Can your farm handle a 55% tax hit? It's a reason to plan and try to get below those limits or take steps. In preserving the heritage of your farm, you get one chance. What's special about it? Is it the wildlife? On my property, I have moose and deer and hundreds of turkeys. I like looking out and seeing them. What do you enjoy about your property? And I know that you are a viable operation once you get started working on it, even if things have kind of gone downhill. There are people that are here to work with you. And I'm pleased to see that OSU is here with some ideas and others. There is a transition plan. It's in your future, whether you like it or not. You are the driver right now. When your health changes, it can change so quickly due to a medical emergency or some problem. Make sure that's not you. Plan for that ahead. And there's some really hard discussions to have. My grandma used to make great home-baked everything, and pies were one of her best. And what we've talked about and what you'll begin working on, it's like a pie. You want the pie, but you don't eat it all at once. You don't feel well. So why not have a slice? And I invite you to have a slice today and get started on your pie. I would share a couple things at the end, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. The first one is this little Dare to Dream document. And it's coming. There we go. And is that showing? Great. This is about 4 pages, and it starts asking you a whole series of questions, and you might have more after you get done with it. But if you honestly answer this, if the property owner will sit down and go through all this and answer these questions, you will find that you have a picture of some of the things you like and some of the things you do not like, things you need to know on the financial side. Again, it's a piece of pie. If you don't want to do it all at once, answer a question or 2 a day. It's not that hard, but we'll share it with you to take and use. And the other document that I'd like to share is we have, oh, I didn't mean to do that one. Oh, I didn't put it in here. I will share it. I'll send it to Andrea and to Nellie. It's an invitation to my class because over the course of 3 terms, we go through the majority of issues. And our goal is to have you where you have a template. You know what you want to go in and ask for. You have time to explore. And we work with you one-on-one. And so, you know, it just started here in January, but it is recorded. So you don't have to come to Clackamas Community College. I know you're all over the state. The nice thing is we come to you on your schedule. So if you can't watch it, you can watch it when time permits. And if you have kind of really slow internet, I have farmers that I send it to by thumb drive because that's what works for them. So we try to meet you wherever you're at and help you as best we can.
Diana, I just put the link to that in your class, the class schedule for that where your class is listed in the chat. So anybody can click on that link and go to right where your class is listed. And then yes, we will get handouts sent out to everyone.
Okay.
Probably at the end of the 3 webinars, maybe. I think not necessarily today, but we will definitely get that sent out to everybody.
And I do apologize for that beeping. As you can tell, it stopped. I am getting rid of this keyboard. I will not have one of these again.
Thank you, Diana. That was wonderful. We always appreciate hearing from you, and there's always a little bit of a different tidbit every time we hear from you. So greatly appreciate you sharing. And then, like I mentioned, if anybody has any questions now, feel free to ask them. Otherwise, we might have a little bit of time at the end, or you can type them into the chat. And Diana would probably be happy to follow up with you later too. I'm speaking for you, Diana, so I hope that's okay. And if you have any questions, just get them over to me, and I can get you in touch with Diana as well. So I think with that, we'll move directly into Christy. And Christy, you should be able to share your presentation. You might check that super quick. Yay, I can see your screen. Awesome. Okay, Christy, if you don't mind, go ahead and take it away.
All right. I thought I had all the technology until the mute button. Here we go.
It would always get you. The mute always get you.
Yep. All right. Well, just give me 1 second here to rearrange some things on my screen so that I can see everything. There we go. Okay. All right. So I think Andrea said at the beginning, you are, just feel free to ask questions. I can I've got the chat open. So if you want to drop something in the chat while I'm talking, that's fine. And I'll try and just keep an eye on it. After 2 years of remote teaching on Zoom with my students, I got kind of practiced at that. So, all right, but here we go. Well, first, I just want to thank Diana for all of the, the experience over the years and sharing so many stories. I think it's so helpful and important for people to hear, those real world experiences, and especially for focusing on the family dynamics and communication, because that's definitely the first step. Today, I am going to share a big picture overview of succession and estate planning so you can kind of get oriented to the details. And then tomorrow, I see Maria is with us now. Maria is going to get more in depth about sort of nuts and bolts and more examples of things. And so I am, like I said, happy to answer questions as we go. But see this as a time when, if you start having questions about specific legal tools, that, we've got Maria tomorrow as well. So, feel, this is going to be sort of the big picture orientation so that you can kind of see the scope of the planning process and how some different pieces work together. Okay. All right. There we go. Okay, so just big picture orientation. We have, 5 big goals for the agricultural succession planning process. And opening up with Diana is perfect because preserving family relationships. Our colleague, Joe Hobson, who some of you may know, and who is Maria's colleague, he loves to say that the whole point of this is being able to still sit down for Thanksgiving dinner, right? And Joe comes and talks to my students too about this process. And, really it's about your family. But the egg succession planning process can be really helpful, and for other reasons too. You can use this process to help strengthen your business. Some of the tools that we talk about will help you to protect you, the owners and the operators, from business disruptions. As we do this process, though, you're going to feel like it's complex because it is a lot. It's your family, it's your business. There's a lot of moving parts here. And we've already, Diana has talked about all the different professionals that will be helpful to you. And it's, going to get expensive, but you're doing the right thing by being here, because by educating yourself first and sort of knowing what you're getting into and thinking about the process and using some of those planning tools that Diana has shared with you as well, like your Dare to Dream, that lets you do some things on your own so that you're not doing them in your lawyer's office when you're getting billed for that, right? And so having some of this work that you're doing up front is minimizing the expense, and you can, talk to your professionals about the level of complexity that you think you are comfortable with as well, and the level of complexity, though, that your operation is going to need. So by proactively organizing your ranch business for succession, you can achieve all of these goals. You can continue the operation, which is exactly what we want to do for, your family. So this is important just to think about, was we talk about business succession, that it's an intergenerational process. And so in our succession planning work, we refer to the 3 generations that are involved in the egg business. So generation 1, we're going to call them Gen 1, and that would be the grandparent generation who are at retirement age, but they often still own the land and they may be still involved in the operation, and that might be some of you as well. Gen 2, we call the parent generation, because they may be actively involved in the operation and they may be planning for their own retirement soon. And Gen 3, we call the child generation, and they're typically young adults who are in college, maybe in my class, or maybe they're recent college graduates, or they have been working on another operation and they're ready to come back, or they're ready to take over their own operation. So when we talk about this, we should remember that there are family successions, but a lot of the same tools here can be applied if you have a non-family successor that is going to come in to the business as well. And because we are very focused on the family, we do want to remember that there are off-farm, 3rd generation young adults, often, or maybe younger. And they are really important. And that gets back to what Diana talked about with family dynamics. That is just as important as the business balance sheets, and having those non-family members feel satisfied with the process, being included, receiving meaningful gifts is something to, keep your eye on all the time, because we want the farm to continue and we want the people who are going to be operating the farm to have business control. But we want the rest of the family to feel, that they're still part of that legacy, but we don't necessarily want them to be making business decisions. So there's ways that we can plan this to meet everyone's needs. So as you go through this process, you're going to rely on your team of advisors to get all the tasks done. These advisors should be, part of a good fluid communication, because what your accountant tells you and your lawyer tells you, you want to make sure that everybody's on the same page, right? And that goes for, those professionals, but it definitely goes for your family. So your whole family is an essential part of this team and should be playing an active role, as Diana talked about. A good agricultural business lawyer, somebody that understands your business, is important. Again, a good agricultural business accountant who understands your business, your banker, your appraiser, your insurance agent, and like Diana said, and provides, there are succession trainings, counselors or consultants that can also help you. So know that there are a lot of people out there to support your process. So now I want to take you through 5 distinct but interlocking steps of the ranch succession process and the estate planning process, because obviously they go together. So first, we're going to take care of the family. And so it's perfect to have Diana start, because that is the first step. Secondly, we want to ensure the financial health of the business, and that can involve some additional planning as well. Third, we want to organize the ranch business as a business entity, such as a limited liability company. Fourth, we're going to organize the ranch business entities for the business succession plan. And so this is where we start moving from, you know, what you should be doing already, which is having a business entity, to how can I use this business entity in my business succession and eventually in my estate plan. So we'll also consider creating the estate plan here. So we'll bring all of it together at the end and see how the pieces work together. So step one, you'll take care of the family by creating a fair distribution plan. So you'll make a list of who will get specific items in your will or your trust when you die. You can, you know, this is what we saw. A lot of it is on Diana's Dare to Dream document that you saw, which is great. And your lawyer and accountant are going to need these things to help you. So it's a really good way to just start to get to work, start putting those pieces together, have a little sliver of the pie, as Diana said. And then you can start thinking about, for each item, if there are particular items, you can start thinking about who will get it when you pass away. But this is a good conversation starter. So ask your family members what would be helpful for them or special to them, or, you know, and keep their individual needs and preferences in mind. It's really good. You know, these conversations can be illuminating for families, and you want to honor your family members and let them know that you're giving them gifts that are meaningful. And that's, you know, this is kind of a bridge that you can use for some of those hard conversations. It can also cause conflicts though, right? And so opening up some of those potential conflicts is the only way that you can work through them. And so again, just thinking back to what Diana said about working through those family relationships and getting some honesty on the table, you know, having an organizing point like this, and always keeping in mind that the goal is to, you know, honor everyone and to recognize those unique relationships, that's always the goal. That might help ease some of those, you know, past conflicts, and really that's what you want in the end. Okay, so moving to step 2, we want to ensure the financial health of the ranch. So, you know, the first part of this is determining the ranch and family income needs. And the pie graphs here, you know, show you that when we add new operators to the business, we don't want to just take the same pie and cut it into smaller pieces. I guess we have a pie metaphor today, right? We want to make the pie bigger first, so that Gen 3 can get a fair salary and benefits to support their younger household. And then as Gen 2 retires, or if Gen 3 is still around, and they have expenses that have to come from the ranch, then, you know, that ranch income is, if you can grow it a little bit, right, then you have more to go around. So this is an important part of strengthening the business, so that that ranch income can cover the needs of a multi-generational operation, because during transition, it will be multi-generational. Or at least that's an option. Maybe that's not part of your plans, but if it is, it's definitely something you're going to have to take into account. And, you know, the first question, of course, is, well, where does the money come from to do this, right? So it can be hard to invest in those new business lines or equipment, or, you know, other things that you might need to grow that, maybe a new piece of ground, when margins are already thin. But, you know, there are ways to generate some cash for new investments, which then can pay themselves back. But different options come with different levels of risk. So it's really important to think carefully about it, because this is about your operation and what works for you. So you're going to hear about more of this from different presenters tomorrow and the next day, and more examples. And so just keep that in mind, that that's a useful part of this process. All right, so I'm going to get a little more detailed when I talk about step 3 here to organize the ranch as a limited liability company. Now, we could talk more generally about organize the ranch as some kind of a business entity. And some people already have a corporation set up, and that's great. And if you do, then, you can work with that. Your lawyer might want to talk about that, how you move forward with that business entity, or maybe an LLC is more appropriate. That's okay. But if you don't have a business entity yet, your lawyer will likely recommend a limited liability company. And there's 2 big benefits to that. You will immediately gain some risk management benefits, and we can use this structure of your business to smooth that transition process as we go down the road. So we'll see how that works now. So you might be wondering, what is a limited liability company first? It is a form of business entity, and lawyers recommend it because it combines kind of the best characteristics of all of the different kinds of business forms you could choose. So when you form an LLC, you file some paperwork, very basic, and you pay a fee to the Oregon Secretary of State, and it doesn't cost very much. And I'm sorry, I can't remember how much it costs. It's in the $100 range, or maybe a little bit more. Diana's nodding, so I think I'm good. I haven't looked it up for a little bit. So it's not expensive to set up, and you get lots of benefits from it. So it protects your personal assets from business liabilities. So if something happens with the farm operation, the liability for that comes out of the farm business accounts or the ranch business accounts. They don't come after your personal assets. The other nice thing about LLCs is that you can choose pass-through taxation with the IRS rather than the corporate tax, which is a separate tax. First taxing the corporation and then taxing the dividends that pass through to the owners, right? But that's the corporate tax. But with an LLC, you just pass the dividends or the profits through to the owners, and then the owners are taxed on that just once. So that's also a big benefit of an LLC. And the LLC is very flexible because it lets you define and separate the ownership of the business from the management roles by writing your own operating agreement. And you will do that, of course, with the help of your lawyer. So if you just start doing business on your own and you don't opt to have an LLC, or if you have been doing business without opting to have an LLC or another business entity, you form a sole proprietorship if it's just one person. If it's 2 or more people who are just doing business together, it is a general partnership. But both of those forms don't protect your personal assets from those legal liabilities. It doesn't have this limited liability form, and that puts your financial future at risk. So by making this active choice to form an LLC, you gain those immediate risk management benefits. So just to illustrate the idea again of limited liability, why it's so important. Again, only your business assets can be claimed to satisfy a business debt or judgment. Your personal assets are held separately from the business assets, and they are protected by what we lawyers call the limited liability veil. So with that veil in place, creditors can't automatically go through that veil to claim your personal assets to satisfy a debt or a judgment. But the limited liability veil is not a bulletproof shield. Creditors can pierce the veil and go after your personal assets if you do not operate the business as a separate legal entity. So after you form an LLC, you have to treat it like it's its own separate business. You have to keep your business account separate from your personal accounts. You can't commingle funds and use business accounts as your personal piggy bank. You need to keep records of your meetings and other decisions by the owners and the managers of the business. And so to get the benefits of this separate legal entity, you have to treat it as such. And I mean, this is something that I didn't really think about or realize or understand much until I went to law school. But like coming, going home after my first kind of business corporations class in law school, I realized that my father-in-law, who is a welder in North Dakota, and he, serves, the whole agricultural community that surrounds him and others, right, with his welding business, he's just a sole proprietorship. And it started making me really nervous, right? Like if you're gonna run a welding business, that could be really dangerous. You could hurt somebody, you could, and I never could convince him just to do this work and do the paperwork. Thankfully, he sold the business. He sold it to someone I went to high school with, actually. It's all okay. But it's the kind of thing that, when you've learned about it, you get nervous for the people who in your life. And Diana shared lots of stories about that. So this is just a very simple thing you can do to protect your business. And it doesn't take long. And now we'll talk about all the other great benefits of that. So keep that limited liability veil up by treating it as a separate entity. Okay, so basic steps to form the limited liability company. First, as we said, file the articles of organization. You pay the fee to the Oregon Secretary of State's office. And then you also want to write the operating agreement to say who owns the business and who gets to make management decisions and other kinds of formalities. We'll talk more about some of the other formalities that you can add in there. So your lawyer can help you with this step based on what you want. Okay, you also have to capitalize the LLC. So your LLC is a separate legal entity that does business, so it has to own the assets that are required to run the business. So in our example, let's say that Gen 2 owns the ag business assets in their own name. And, your lawyer can help you with these formalities so that you sign over the ownership of the ranch assets to the LLC, such as the land, the equipment, any inventory, livestock, anything else you use to run the business. So now those physical business assets are owned by the LLC. And in return for that signing over the property, Gen 2 then, in this example, would get to own all of the membership interests and the voting rights in the LLC. So Gen 2 still owns all of their assets through owning the LLC. Now, as I talked about, you must also operate the LLC according to the bylaws, follow all accounting formalities, treating it as its own separate legal entity. Okay, and then remember, as you're operating the ranch LLC as a separate legal entity, that's necessary to keep that limited liability protection. Following the operating agreement is important. Having those, basic meetings, keeping minutes, showing that the member owners are exercising their voting rights to make their major business decisions. Again, you define what all of that is in your operating agreement. And you will have to keep up your annual LLC registration renewal and fee with the state. And having those relationships with the lawyer and accountant can help you with that. Maybe, just as important is keeping up with those accounting formalities so that the ranch LLC operates as a separate legal entity that's managing business assets. So properly capitalizing the business so the ranch has enough cash flow to pay bills on time, keeping clear records of all accounts, not commingling personal and business funds. When my father-in-law would, write a check from his quality welding business to, my now husband and I, when we were, in our very younger days, and he would write us $100 check to help pay groceries for a month or something like that, but it would come out of his business account, and we didn't do anything to earn that money. He was just giving it to us as a gift, right? And so he didn't have an LLC. He wasn't violating any of these formalities. But once you have an LLC, you can't do that. You know, you're paying out salary from the business to the people who are working there. If you have profits, you're distributing those profits as distribution payments to the owners. And so you, of course, are going to get a flow of income from this business, but it has to be done according to all of those business and accounting formalities. So now, if you have an LLC set up, that's great. Step 4 would be to use business or entities like this to organize the business succession plan. So one thing that you could consider doing is creating a last person standing LLC structure by creating separate LLCs for different farm or ranch functions, and then kind of connecting them into one business with leases and contracts. So this looks kind of, it gets more complicated, right? It looks like it gets more complicated, but this is, you know, can be an important part of your transition process if you have different pieces of land, if you want to slowly transition management of parts of the operation to others. And eventually, if you want, you know, some people like your off farm kids or grandkids to get some of the benefits from the financial benefits of the farm, this can be a really helpful structure. So let's see. I think I'll just go to the next slide because it's helpful to show how this works. So the last person standing structure, it feels really legalistic and technical, but we have to bring it all back to the family and what purpose this is serving, right? So this LLC structure provides a clear stream of income to family members that's based on their role in the business. So we have Hobson Farms on the far left, sort of as the main operating LLC, right? The operating business entity. And we call this Hobson after our colleague Joe Hobson, who I already mentioned. So Hobson Farms would pay a fair market value rent to a separate LLC called Hobson Pastures that owns some of the pasture land. And Hobson Farms would also pay salary to the farm managers. So if Gen 2 is still involved in managing the farm, they would get a salary, and your farming Gen 3, they would also get a salary based on their employment. Now, Hobson Farms also pays distributions from its profits to all of the ranch owners. So you see that the off-farm Gen 3 kids can get included in the benefits of ownership of Hobson Pastures, the landowning LLC, because that ownership interest doesn't give them any management control over the operating entity, Hobson Farms. But when Hobson Farms pays a fair market rent to the Hobson Pastures LLC, that fair market rent includes a profit margin that then can be given as distributions to anybody who owns part of that LLC. So that could be, of course, Gen 2 would still want to own part of that land holding entity, owning the land. You can include your farming Generation 3, your business successor, in owning that part of the land. And you can also include your off-farm Generation 3 heirs so that they can get a flow of income. But it's that lease relationship between the operating Hobson Farms entity, you know, they're doing all of the buying and selling and, you know, management, you know, all the things that are involved in running the operation. They're doing all of that work, passing that rent on to the land holding entity, and then the land holding entity passing a portion of that profit on to owners. So your off-farm Generation 3 heirs, those kids who aren't going to be there in management, they don't get a stake in management. They only get a stake in ownership and enjoying some of those financial rewards. There we go. And then, because we have different family members owning different parts of this business, right? We want to keep everything in the family. And again, and you get to define who family is in this situation, right? And so you can have buy-sell agreements in place for all of these business entities, so that the business ownership can't be lost to debt, divorce, death, or, you know, other things that happen, which we can talk about more. All right, so we have talked a lot about business entities and planning, just how to set up your business. And once you figure out how you want your business set up, then we can move on to creating the estate plan. So, you know, working with ag business families, getting that business organized and set up, that is so key, because your business is going to live on after you. And that is, you know, the big part of your legacy that you want to pass forward. So there are things to decide. And this is part of the timeline ideas that Diana was talking about. So eventually, right, your Generation 3 ranch successor is going to get full control of the operating LLC, that business that is doing the active farming and the active ranching that keeps the business alive. And so you can decide what timeline that you want that to happen on. So you can slowly pass those ownership interests to your Farm Gen 3. As you transition into retirement, you can choose to do that as gifts over time, just giving them ownership interests, or you can choose to sell it to them over time. And if you have a non-family successor, sale is definitely the better way to do that. You can set up milestones for when those ownership interests will pass to them during your lifetime, so that you can set up clear expectations of how they become owners of the ranch. And remember, having this structure allows you to give your non-farming children meaningful gifts from your estate and continued share in the family legacy and the financial returns from it, without letting them have a role in the business management, because too many cooks in the kitchen, right? So being really clear about who is going to have management control and who will only have business ownership, that only has the privilege of getting some financial return, that is really important. And then consider the big picture. So your ranch is your legacy. You want to ensure that it's going to continue to be a financial benefit to your family, and you want to continue its role in Oregon's ag sector. And you'll hear about this more tomorrow from Maria, I'm sure. So finally, we want to create a plan that minimizes estate taxes. We want to keep as much value in the ag business as possible, because that's how you will be able to continue on into the future, right? So, you know, you have a lot of planning to do, and you've heard some examples about how life happens when you're busy making other plans, right? Your business succession and estate plan, it needs to be resilient. And in order to plan for those, you know, things that happen in life, the ups and the downs, the things you cannot control, we need to think about how your business and estate plan will help the ranch and the family weather disruptive life events. So we've seen, I hope, how the strong LLC structure is really a simple risk management strategy that protects the farm and the family if disaster strikes. You know, if one of those accidents happens, if something else creates a lot of liability for the farm or the ranch, it means that your family's assets are protected. So making sure to renew that LLC registration annually, following the operating agreement, maintaining the accounting practices to maintain that limited liability veil, that is all really important. If you want to be treated like a separate like that business is a separate legal entity that is itself responsible for any liability, then you have to operate it as such. And maintaining adequate insurance, of course, is essential. And the management agreements and contracts between different LLCs, if you set up that last person standing structure so that you have different LLCs that are connected by contracts or leases, that should protect that asset holding LLC, like the pasture land, against any risk of loss that the operating entity might incur or be liable for. So by having these separate LLCs in place, having them connected through long-term leases at fair market value rates, that all creates sort of a kind of a shell around that operating entity, right? That main business that owns, buys, sells, does the actual work. That kind of provides a protective layer around that so that if liability happens, that explosion can't come out and hit the rest of the business assets like your land or your personal assets. Okay, so it's an important overall structure for risk management. And then, back to the operating agreement and the buy-sell agreements that we mentioned, those can be very key to protecting against many disruptive life events for family members, such as the untimely death of a family member, divorce, bankruptcy of one of the family members. Maybe one of your family members wants to withdraw from the business and simply take their cash and, not be included anymore in part of the flow of the finance or the financial benefits that come from the ranch. Or maybe a family member wanted to withdraw from the business at one point and then wants to re-enter the business, right? And will that be possible? So the buy-sell agreements in each LLC, they will define the family relationships and who may own interests. So in the example that Diana gave, right, there was an in-law who they knew they didn't want to get ownership interest in a business, right, or in their farm after that divorce. And so, a divorce settlement would not allow that family member to take part of the business assets as part of that settlement. You would have to pay out in a different way in order to settle that divorce. The buy-sell agreements can also specify that the business entity or its owners have an obligation to purchase the ownership interest from a family member who leaves the business for any of these reasons, so that family member cannot sell it off to someone else, that if they want to leave, the membership interests go back to the business. And if they do, if the business has to buy back some ownership agreements from one of the family members, the operating agreement includes a method for calculating the price that will be paid for the departing member's shares. We will also usually say that that payment has to be made over time with interest so that it's not, a big lump sum that comes out of the cash flow of the business. But it's also fair to the departing business member or family member so that they can still get paid over time. And that's where fair market interest would come into that equation. And if a family member does want to come back into the business, then they may repurchase some ownership interests if they're in a position to do so. And that would be on equivalent terms to their departing the business. So I think in the next webinar, Maria will share some examples and how to avoid letting some of these big life events interfere with the long-term health of your ranch and, importantly, your family. And also remember that your Gen 3 farm successor, they are the future of your ag business. The most successful succession plans for ag businesses provide Gen 3 with some reasonable expectations, a sense of ownership, some certainty, and importantly, a sense of security. So creating a Gen 3 farm LLC as part of that last person standing LLC structure, that's a tangible way to show that you're making a commitment to their long-term success. Because if they have their own business line, maybe their own piece of ground you were able to bring into the business as part of making the pie bigger, right? You're giving them something that they can own and that they can build equity in. And if something happens along the way, they feel like they've been treated as a partner in all of this, right? So equally important is creating a management agreement where Gen 2 turns over some of the management duties to Gen 3 over time. That's where, what Diana talked about of writing down what are you doing and why are you doing it, right? And so having that kind of management transition plan is also important so that you can start making those, turning over some of that control to your third generation so that they can start practicing really and developing those skills that will help integrate them into the existing business and give all of the generations some peace of mind that this is a viable, healthy, thriving business moving forward. And then, whether your successor is a family member or not, it's important to practice good communication. So you also want to keep good records and just be really transparent about how decisions are being made. That is, again, it goes back to kind of keeping those processes in place that you've put into your operating agreement, that you're going to have meetings and you're going to document what decisions are made. That helps show that your LLCs are being run as separate business entities, but it also helps maintain communication and transparency and accountability for all of the family members that have a stake in the business. So as a family and as a business, you will benefit from working together and again with your professional advisors. So the more you understand about this process and the needs and the wants of your family members, the better your advisors can help you to realize your goals with less time and less expense because you've done some of your homework at home and not on billable hour time. So as you go through this process, you can always use best practices. Just have them in mind and make sure that you're kind of doing this as you go along. So communicate often so that you can revisit your plans regularly or as major life events unfold. So the birth of a grandchild, the death of a partner, maybe a graduation from college of one of your kids or grandkids, all of the other great life events in your family might require you to update your plans. And so be ready. And as those things happen, then it's time to keep looking at those plans and updating that communication. Now, in all things business, you got to pay excruciating attention to detail and be as businesslike as possible. So, I guess sometimes this feels even more important with a family business where a lot can go unsaid. But by having things businesslike, everyone can be treated fairly. There's not, you can go back to those family conflicts, right? About somebody feeling like they weren't treated fairly or somebody feeling like that, sibling got something better or whatever, but having everything happen on business-like terms here is kind of a good way to diffuse some of that moving forward. And finally, I work with college students. They all have their own big ideas about how things should go and in the world. I myself have a 17-year-old son right now who is very certain about how the world should be and what he deserves in life, right? But you just have to respect each person's path. So giving each person a stake in that process that's meaningful for their particular life goals and directions will help them feel valued as a family member. You're seeing them as their own person. They can continue to appreciate their family and their ranch connections into the future. And, I guess going back to the beginning, that you can still get together and have Thanksgiving dinner, right? It's not, you want your relationships to be more than about being business partners. You want them to be about being a family. So if you can be a family and set aside the business for a while, that ultimately is probably the best way that you want to move. So, we're happy to take questions. We can bring Diana back to you. I want to thank you for being part of Oregon Agriculture. You have, set us up for food security and for the next generation that I work with every day. Your families, thank you for taking care of them and doing this work. And I think we can open it up to questions.
Thank you, Christy. That was great. I really appreciate it. Really great information to share. Does anyone have any questions? And we have Diana still here too, just like Christy mentioned. So if anybody has any questions for either one, please feel free to chime in here.
I have a question, like just sort of on specific scenario. You both spoke to non-family succession. I was just wondering if we could sort of talk about that a little bit right now. Like, how do you see that as being different and like in a broad picture? And where would you find someone to take on that kind of a role if you don't have someone identified?
Well, I've done that quite a bit. I have to be honest, I have a number of farmer and ranchers that have, their children are beyond retirement age, right? And so, and if they're not interested and the grandkids are not interested, well, what do you do? And so I can share the link to the Oregon farm manager link, and they have appraisers and farm managers. So there are people who professionally manage farms. We've written job descriptions and shared that with colleges and universities, the ag department, to see if there are students who would be interested. I think there are lots of options. You may have neighbors. I mean, it's kind of individual to what you do, but I'm enthusiastic. At first, I was really disappointed about what do we do with all these people retiring? And I have found there is an abundance of people who would like to continue farming and ranching. So don't be afraid.
Yeah, I often, when I teach agricultural law, and I have a mix of students from all kinds of agricultural science majors to our department's agricultural business management majors. And, there are always a sizable portion, maybe a third, who say they have a family farm that they are going back to. And there's always, a portion that say, I want a farm, but I don't have a family farm. And how do I do that? It has been hard. It's hard to do that matchmaking. So I think the resources that, Diana's talked about are important for, the people in this room for finding people. And then we also have to make sure that those graduating students know what that pipeline looks like. And, maybe you don't want someone who's just graduating from college, right? Like our majors typically are going to go work for, they're going to go work first. They're going to work somewhere in the industry. They go to a lot of the input suppliers or, farm credit service, or, they'll do all kinds of different things and work for a while, but they're going to want to eventually come back to that path and they're here studying that because that's their dream too. I think there was a second part of the question. What does that look like? So I don't have that much, that's not my part, the part of my job that I haven't, really seen individual people through that process. And maybe Diana can talk to that more, but the way it kind of works in the framework that we've set up and what Joe Hobson has shared as we developed this farm ranch succession material together is having this very business-like structure and letting the incoming generation have their own business, their own LLC. Let's it, what Joe likes to say is that we set this up to fall apart, which sounds very counterintuitive. But if we know that, you have that sense of security that if something goes wrong, that you can take your piece of it and still be okay, that creates a lot of trust, and it creates a lot of buy-in, and that having this set up in a way that gives that incoming person a chance to build equity. They don't just feel like they're kind of being, and having those expectations and those milestones following through on it. All of that accountability, for both sides really, can create a relationship that allows that to flourish. And so if the family members still are going to be owners of the land and still get that flow of income, and they're just going to be kind of passive landlords, then having that, really new business manager who gets the benefits of owning the operating entity, that can create, a lot of incentive for good management and operation going forward.
Great, thank you. We had a question in the chat. How can we reduce the value of property to deal with inheritance tax concerns?
There are some excellent ways. First of all, there can be planned giving that you might choose to do. So for instance, if you worked with a good ag accountant, let's say you have livestock. Well, when are they at their lowest value? When they're born. So you might gift up to the limit, currently $17,000 per person, $34,000 if you jointly own that with you and perhaps your spouse. And so you can divest a lot of gift giving, and it doesn't go against your federal or states. That's one way, because obviously they're quite valuable when you're ready to take them to market. Another way is conservation easements. So Nellie will go into a lot more on that when she and her team and Mark go into the aspects of that. But just imagine your property has basically two values. There's the agricultural value, and then there's the development value. And so the intent of the easement is to help you reduce the value of the property by down to the point of the agricultural easement. You can get money, and or you can get tax incentives for up to 15 years. So it can be very beneficial to lower the price of your property through several of these. That's why it's so important to get started and know, what are you working with? I mean, how far do you have to go? Because you can start purposely choosing how you reduce it down.
Yeah, I don't have anything to add. I will defer to the accountant.
I think Maria Schmidlkoffer will also be talking about strategies tomorrow as well.
And tomorrow, Mark will be sharing with us more about easements as well. So I think we'll, great answer, Diana. But we'll learn more of a few more in-depth pieces tomorrow as well. We had another question in the chat, just to making sure that we were going to be able to share the Dare to Dream that Diana shared with us, which we will. And then the other paper about her class, we'll share that as well. So that'll go out in an email. I will also plan to send the recording out to anybody that wants it as well.
And we have the the handbook from Joe and I. Maybe you've already got that posted.
Great, yes. Another question, can the LLC make the gift?
You can make it, it's from your estate. It's going to be totally on how you structure this. So before I tell you where the gift comes from, you want to look at how you have things structured. And that's why you want your attorney and your accountant in this. I can't give you a blanket answer to that. I can tell you for sure as individuals, it depends on how you did some of your structuring.
Yeah, and so when the LLC owns the assets and you own the LLC, right? You own the value of the LLC. So you likely will be gifting, I mean, if you want to be gifting business assets that you own, you would just be gifting ownership interest in the LLC. And there are some, you know, accounting things, the discounting and things that you can use that I'll also defer to Maria and Diana and your accountants on, that may apply. So you just have to think about, like, here's the things that I own in my personal name, and, you know, here's my personal things. Is it going to come out of there? And here's the business that I own and what the business is worth. And you don't gift business assets item by item, right? You gift ownership interest in the business. So, and then what pot that comes out of, again, yeah, like Diana said, that depends on your situation and how you do that. I like to think about my father-in-law. He is always my best example. He is a vintage snowmobile enthusiast, and he has built an entire ginormous shed full of vintage snowmobile parts. Most of them don't run. Most of them aren't even like together, right? And we all look at that and think, oh my God, what are we gonna do? Right? So, yeah. So yes,
Great.
your percentage ownership could change hands. That is correct.
Perfect. Liza Jane, did you have a question?
I do. Thank you. If on the gifting, if you have so for us, our land is in an LLC and our business assets are in a corporation, can I gift 17,000 out of each per year? So 34 total?
And so, again, I'm going to defer you to your accountant and your attorney, because I don't know how your ownership totally works.
Okay.
And I just want to make sure I don't cause any difficulties to people. They'll be able to answer that for you.
Okay, thank you.
But I would like to make one other comment on gifting and the things that you do. Gifting can be an exceptional way to find out how people are going to use what you give with them. You know, if you're trusting a tremendous future for your property in the hands of someone, why not give them a little along and see, are they really diligent in what they do with it, or did they go out and waste money? Do they just spend through it in no time at all? Because that tends to be an indicator of how they will operate with your operation, and whether you need to perhaps have a trustee involved in your trust, because again, you want it to succeed. So consider this as a chance to kind of test people out and see how they do.
Okay, thank you. Is there any other questions as we wind down here? We have just a couple of minutes left. If anything comes to mind later on, please feel free to reach out. Each of you have my email address, I believe, and we can connect you with Diana or Christy with specific questions, or just hang on to those questions for Maria tomorrow and Mark tomorrow. I'm sure that some of there's quite a bit of crossover there, so happy to answer those at that time. So if there are no other questions, then we'll go ahead and sign off for today. Any of you that are on, please note that the link that you got on today is the same link for tomorrow and for Wednesday. So I don't expect another one coming your direction from me, and we will see you back here tomorrow. Thank you, everyone. Thank you,
Okay,
Diana
bye.
and Christy.
Okay,
Thank you.
Bye.